Alright, hello everybody, this is AW. Reading Karl Rosenkranz, The Aesthetics of Ugliness. Interesting attempt of his to extend Hegel's aesthetic theory, particularly on the concept of ugliness, which I'm pretty sure Hegel must go over, but there are things Hegel goes over in his system in which, given the constraints and his own interest, he didn't give them much detail. And Rosenkranz does quite a lot. Actually, if you look at just the table of contents, it's pretty impressive. And, I mean, just follows along very well with what Hegel does. There's ugliness as formlessness, ugliness as incorrectness, disfiguration or deformation. Oh, that's weird. That's, I swear there was a more extensive. Now I kind of find disappointing that the cover art they chose is ugly, but they could have chosen an uglier one. Anyways, where is that much? It must be after the introduction. Okay, so it's on page 38 of the PDF that it has the full contents. It says the introduction, the negative in general, more general, like the imperfect, the naturally ugly, the intellectually ugly, the aesthetically ugly, ugliness in relation to the individual arts, the pleasure in ugliness, and very much a student of Hegel with a very long introduction. Well, it's actually 20 pages or so for an introduction. For Hegel is short. Hegel's introductions are usually about 50 pages. But just looking at the list, like part 1, ugliness is formlessness, amorphism, asymmetry, disharmony, very fitting. A lot of people don't think about formlessness as being ugly, but it is. But it's ugly in a way that it's not too bothersome to us. It's not an assault upon our senses. It's just kind of boring. It's the kind of stuff that where people go like look at some like splotches of paint and from like modernist or like postmodernist art, and they're like, why the fuck would I care about that? That doesn't mean anything. Nothing interesting about it. Two, incorrectness in general, incorrectness in particular styles, incorrectness in individual arts. That'll be interesting to see what he says, what he means by incorrectness. I have a general gist of what may be meant. Incorrectness both like as these deliberate errors of many kinds. Could be also incorrectness of and a form of expression to the content. 3, disfiguration, which is the highest form and the most thought out, it seems, most worked out. The mean, meaning like, a mean person. The petty, the feeble, the low, the ordinary, the accidental, the arbitrary, the crude, and this is interesting in that like it's more about like a character expression, like the virtuous character, or rather vicious character in this case. Be the repulsive, the clumsy, the dead, and the empty, the hideous. That'll be interesting because that's like what most people think of as ugly. In the Hades, there's the tasteless, the disgusting, and then finally evil. And evil is the criminal, the ghastly, the diabolical, which has its own 3 subsections: the demonic, the witch-like, and finally peaks in the satanic, which would be... Well, technically speaking, there should be no ideas for negatives. This is as close as you're going to get with a negative, which makes perfect sense. And then it ends with the caricature, which is kind of the mirror, the negative mirror of comedy, which is the peak of aesthetics for Hegel. So at least on the list side, it looks pretty good. A lot of stuff I've never thought about, but just from the quick glance at it, it makes a lot of sense.
Can I ask you to speculate on where propaganda would fit in this list, or how you would conceive of it?
Like propaganda is in, like, making your enemies look ugly.
I mean, yeah, that would fit in the mean or disfiguration. I think propaganda would be a little too broad. I mean, it just means to propagate something.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it would particularly be any of these so much as, well, what is the propaganda about? If you could portray your enemy as satanic, you could portray them as a joke, caricature them, you can portray them as disgusting, tasteless, whatever. It can involve any of these. All right, let's go back to the introduction. Starts at page 10. Approaching Ugliness. Karl Rosenkranz's contribution to philosophy. Wait, all right. Hold on. Is this his, or is this the author's, the translator's introduction? Given the title, it seems like it'd be the translator's introduction, which I don't care about.
Yeah. He mentions Andy Warhol and Marcel Duchamp, so...
Okay, yeah, we'll skip this then. I don't particularly care what the translator says.
Examples in voice chat, if you want to look at them. That's the only interesting thing in it.
Yeah, because otherwise I was going to think it's a bad taste to start your introduction by quoting yourself.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's skip to, what was it? 38. All right, his introduction, which is page 39. All right. And it starts... This was on purpose, for sure. Starts with a dash.
And?
Yeah. And take my advice. Don't. Love too much the sun or stars. Come, follow me down into the dark realm. Goethe. I assume that's probably from Faust. Great
It's from Iphigeny and Taurus.
All right. Cool. Great investigators of the heart have plunged into the frightful abyss of evil and have represented the awful forms that confronted them in its night. Great poets like Dante have further sketched these shapes. Painters like Orcagna, Michelangelo, Rubens, and Peter Cornelius have given them sensuous presence, and musicians like Ludwig Spohr have allowed us to hear the dreadful tones of perdition, through which evil screeches and howls the conflict of its torn spirit. Hell is not simply ethical, religious. It is also aesthetic. We stand in the midst of evil and general wickedness, but also in the midst of ugliness. The fright of non-form and the deformed, of vulgarity and atrociousness, surround us in endless shapes, ranging in dimensions from the pygmy to those giant distortions out of which infernal evil grins at us, baring its teeth. It is into this hell of the beautiful that we wish to descend. But descent is impossible without also gaining admittance into the real hell, the hell of evil, since the ugliest ugliness is not that which in nature repels us in swamps, crippled trees, newts and toads, in gaping sea monster jaws and massive pachyderms, in rats and apes. It is the selfishness that reveals itself in spiteful and frivolous gestures, in the furrows of passion, in crooked glances, and in crime. I agree. We are familiar enough with this hell. Everyone has a share of its pain. It touches on the emotions, on the eye and on the ear in manifold ways. The delicately constituted, the well-educated, often suffer unspeakably on this account, since brutality and vulgarity, the monstrous and the amorphous, all antagonize the nobler sensibility in 1,000 guises. Still, a fact can be itself familiar enough without its full significance, its full extent, being properly recognized. This is the case with ugliness. The theory of the fine arts, the legislation of good taste, the science of aesthetics have been propagated among the civilized peoples of Europe for over a century, until they have educated themselves in it to a great extent. But despite this, the concept of ugliness, though one brushed up against it everywhere, remained in comparison very far behind. It is appropriate that finally the dark side of the luminous form of beauty should become a central moment of the science of aesthetics, as illness is in pathology, and as evil in ethics. Not, as we said, as if the unaesthetic in its individual manifestations was insufficiently known. For how could this be possible, since nature, life, and art remind us of it at every moment? And yet a full exposition of its content and a more explicit understanding of its organization have until now not been attempted. German philosophy, in any case, deserves praise for having first had the courage to recognize ugliness as the aesthetic non-idea, as an integral moment of aesthetics, and also recognizing that beauty passes through ugliness into the comical. Never again will we be able to deny this discovery, through which negative beauty has come into its own right. But the handling of the concept of ugliness has not advanced, in part due to a cursory and incurious generality, in part due to a one-sided spiritualist attitude. This attitude was too exclusively aimed at explaining some of the characters of Shakespeare and Goethe, Byron and Callet Hoffman. An aesthetic of ugliness might sound to some like a wooden iron, since ugliness is of the opposite of beauty. Since ugliness is the opposite of beauty. Except that ugliness is inseparable from the concept of beauty, since the one contains the other in its development as perpetual aberration into which it can lapse with just a modicum of too little or too much. All aesthetics are forced, with a description of the positive parameters of beauty, to somehow touch also the negative ones of ugliness. One finds at least the warning that, should things not be carried out as they demand, beauty would be missed, and in its place ugliness would be produced. The aesthetics of ugliness should represent its origin, its possibilities, and its modes, and can thus be of utility even to artists. To them it will naturally always be more creative to represent perfected beauty, rather than to turn their talents to the service of ugliness. Not so today. Today, it's like people go out of their way to try to produce ugly things. Very strange. And not very interesting ugly things, just like banal ugly things, like normies. You know, because there's like ugly stuff like, what's his name? What's the guy who made the Alien?
H.R. Giger.
Yeah, Giger.
Yeah.
Like Giger focuses entirely on ugliness, but it's an ugliness that's captivating. Whereas if you like, say like in video games today, like a lot of the big developers, for some reason have decided that they want to be realistic, and realism involves no beautiful people above about a 7. And the average person is somewhere around a 4. And that's kind of just, well, boring. It's the kind of ugliness that's not interesting. It doesn't say anything. It's just like, well, like the world is ugly. But ugly in a banal sense. So let's see, it can be, To them, it will naturally always be more creative to represent perfected beauty rather than to turn their talents to the service of ugliness. To seek out the form of a god is endlessly more satisfying and elevated than the presentation of a devilish grimace. But the artist cannot always avoid ugliness. It is even often the case that he needs it as a foil or as a point of passage in the manifestation of an idea. Finally, the artist who produces the comical cannot completely avoid ugliness. Probably the peak of this is Hieronymus Bosch. If you've seen the art, The Garden of Earthly Delights, and other of his triptychs. They're comical. They focus on like
exaggeration.
Yeah, exaggeration. But then it also is just like, yeah, typical standard ugly shit, but in a very interesting way.
Even heaven looks kind of ugly in that triptych.
Mm-hmm. So on the side of the arts, we can, however, only approach those which, as free arts, are their own ends, and as theoretical arts work on the eye and the ear. Those that serve the practical senses of touch, taste, and smell are here excluded. Herr Karl Friedrich von Rummer, in his Geist der Kochkunst, Spirit of Cookery, and this is in his interesting Vorstellungen über die, what's that word? Is it Esskunst?
Esskunst.
Yeah. Lectures on the art of eating. Is that Eugen or Eugene?
Eugen Baron.
Eugen Baron.
Yeah.
Von Verst.
Verst.
In his astute work on gastronomy, gastrosophie. Gastrosophie. That's a great title. I gotta give it that.
Yeah.
The wisdom of the stomach.
Yeah.
Which is of lasting value, especially from an ethnographic perspective. All of these works have raised the sybarite aesthetic to a high level. No, never seen that word, sybarite.
Oh, what does that mean?
Just
one
cares about like luxury of the flesh and stuff.
Self-indulgent, the fondness of sensuous luxury.
Yeah.
I'm going to attempt to use that word a lot more. That's a very nice little word. So let's see a bit. All these works have raised the sybarite aesthetic to a high level. One can convince oneself on the basis of these works that the general laws that apply to the beautiful and the ugly hold equally for the aesthetic of fine eating, which for many people is most important. We, however, cannot agree with this. It is self-evident that a science like ours, which requires full seriousness of mind, cannot be treated assiduously if one takes one's cue from the frail elegance of a coffee table aesthetic, for then the principal thing itself would have to be omitted. The aesthetics of ugliness makes it our responsibility to also deal with concepts whose discussion or even mention might well otherwise be regarded as an offense to good manners. If someone picks up a book on the pathology and therapy of disease, then they must anticipate the disgusting, and that is also the case here. I hadn't even thought about that part of what, well, actually I thought partly about it, which is part of why like stuff like eating, like the tongue, taste, smell, touch, can't be mediums for art, is that you, not only are they like highly non-malleable with regards to what you can do, but one of the things that you definitely can't do is ugliness. Nobody wants to taste an ugly dinner. An ugly taste is just going to make you fucking want to barf. You don't want to like have an ugly smell, and you don't want to have an ugly touch. Like most people go like an ugly touch. What is that? I suppose like for most people it'd be like squishy, slimy, like things. That's the kind of stuff you touch and it makes your skin crawl.
Or touching one thing and it not having the texture you expected. That too. And sure, there are weirdos out there who love that kind of stuff, but even for them, it's not that meaningful. Like these are the kind of people who say, like, oh, the experience itself is the art. You know, the fact that it made me feel something. The same kind of people who think that jerking off in the middle of the street is somehow artistic. because it makes you feel and it makes other people feel disgust at you. Well, if you cause people to feel anything, it's hard. No. Okay. Is this a page break or is this some kind of weird footnote?
Where there's a footnote, just says that
Yeah,
he used tea table, but the translator put coffee table because in English coffee table is a German tea table. I didn't know that.
Oh, okay. It's because I see the line break right there, yeah, and I was not sure
Yeah.
if that's like some weird other nut or whatever.
Oh,
Okay, well, reading anyways. Actually, I didn't finish that itself. For then the principal thing itself would have to be a minute. Okay. The aesthetics of ugliness makes it our responsibility to also deal with the concepts of discussions. Concepts whose discussion or even mention might well otherwise be regarded as an offense to good manners. If someone picks up a book on the pathology and therapy of disease, then they must anticipate the disgusting. And that is also the case here. Yep. That ugliness is a concept that can only be understood relative to another concept is not difficult to understand. The other concept is that of beauty, since ugliness can only be insofar as beauty is, which constitutes its positive presupposition. If there were no beauty, then there certainly would not be any ugliness, since the latter only exists as the negation of the former. Beauty is the godlike, original idea, and ugliness, being its negation, has such only a secondary existence. It generates itself in and out of the beautiful. It is not as if beauty, while being beauty, could simultaneously be ugly, but rather in the sense that the same conditions that make up the causal necessity of beauty turn into its opposite. Now, there's a way in which what he said is true. It just might not be clear to people how that is, because there is a sense in which, like, we all recognize that beauty can be ugly, but it's not that it's beautiful. Like as he says, like it's not that beauty and being beautiful, like it's somehow ugly. As if beauty, while being beauty, could simultaneously be ugly. It's a perspectival thing in which, how would you say it? I don't have any good examples in mind, but I know like virtually everybody has experienced this, especially if you don't live under a rock, that there are things that are formally beautiful, but like that formality itself does not give you a sense of an actual living idea in whatever it is, whether it be music, visual arts, dancing, whatever, where you recognize, okay, like what they're doing is like on a formal level beautiful, but then the way that's being executed is just dead, as I would say. And so in a way, it's just it's ugly in this boring, lifeless vapidity, vapidness. I don't even know what the word is.
There's a lot of maybe corporate music could be an example of this.
Yeah, stuff like that. Or it has the formality of it, but not the living content that, makes things like actually good. And it's that sense, like, beauty can be ugly in that it's lifeless. But then it's not what is beautiful about it that makes it ugly. It's just like there's only one level of it that's beautiful, and then the rest of it is nothing. So he says, it is not as if beauty, while being beauty, could simultaneously be ugly, but rather in the sense that the same conditions that make up the causal necessity of beauty turn into its opposite. And how I interpret that right now is my own account of ugliness before I was reading this, or before I haven't even read Hegel's own account of it. my own intimations of it, given what I do know about the positivity of beauty, was that ugliness is particular forms of beauty which are like exaggerated. They overtake too much of the principle of an artwork, and that's why they become ugly. Basically, like just like how evil works in morality, ugliness works in beauty. Oh, excuse me. Which makes sense to me. So what is beautiful in one certain context, if you like just basically make it become too central and like overcome other themes along with it, because like for example, like in a way childishness is beautiful, and if you make an artwork that just focuses on like expressing like pure childishness, there's nothing ugly about it. But if you take childishness in a context of a theme that is more serious, more adult, and you extend that childishness like as a formality over it, trying to overtake all these other things, it does become ugly. I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, I get it, but you know, I don't know if the audience will. We need an example.
Yeah, I don't have any examples directly in mind. If I did, it'd probably be some shitty anime.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking in anime. Like, or nothing wrong with, like, you know, a comic book of a certain kind, but those chibi versions of Teen Titans, kind of like that. Can't take it seriously. It's ugly to me. Or super deformed versions of anime or whatever.
Yeah. But I'm thinking more of like, say... actually, that's a good example. Comic book heroes. American comic book heroes particularly. It's a very childish thing. And then like they take themselves like sometimes like a bit too seriously in the stories. And it just comes off wrong. I get it. I get it that there's plenty of audience that likes it. But that audience themselves is wrong. Like, you know, like you're supposed to take these people who are wearing like, you know, spandex, like briefs over like pants.
Yeah.
You know, with these like ridiculous outfits. And these are supposed to be like these like super geniuses and like highly like mysteriously esoterically like knowledgeable beings. Are you fucking kidding me? No.
Yeah. That's why Watchmen spoofed it.
Yep. So continuing. This intimate connection of beauty and ugliness as its self-annihilation accounts for the possibility of ugliness transcending itself in turn, that is, in its existence as negative beauty, a dissolving of its opposition to beauty, and the return to oneness with it. Beauty reveals itself in this process as the power that once again subdues the revolt of ugliness. In this beautification an endless mirth arises, which arouses in us smiling and laughter. Ugliness frees itself in this movement from its hybrid self-involved nature. It confesses its powerlessness and becomes comical. All that is comical comprehends within itself a moment that relates negativity to the pure, simple ideal, but this negation is reduced in the comical to an appearance, to nothing. The positive ideal is confirmed in the comical because and insofar as its negative aspect disappears in itself. For those who don't know, the essence of the comical for Hegel is that the finite is for a moment apparently serious, but it's comical to us outside of it, and it's even comical within the works themselves afterwards, when it's realized that the seriousness was not real, that like the issues that all these characters are worried about don't have any like great weight to them in the end. That a lot of these characters, due to their ignorance, were being foolish. That out of foolishness, a lot of mistakes are made that, you know, would not have been made had you not just like taken it seriously when it didn't deserve to be taken seriously. which, I mean, Hegel's conception of that is like spot on to what I view as comical in the everyday life, and what most people seem to indeed recognize as comical. So it makes sense that evil in the end ends up being comical. Well, ugliness in the end ends up being comical. The study of ugliness is thus precisely limited by the very essence of its object. The beautiful is the positive condition of its existence, and the comical is the form through which it delivers itself from its purely negative character relative to the beautiful. The simply beautiful always stands against the ugly in negative fashion, since it is only beautiful insofar as it is not ugly, and the ugly is only ugly insofar as it is not beautiful. It is not as if the beautiful, in order to be beautiful, owed something to the ugly. It is beautiful also in the absence of its foil, but ugliness is the danger that threatens it from inside itself, the contradiction that it poses to itself through its essence. With ugliness, it is different. It is what it is indeed empirically through itself. That it is ugliness, however, it is only possible through its reflexive relationship to the beautiful, in relation to which it finds its measure. Beauty, like goodness, is thus an absolute, and ugliness, like evil, is only something relative. Very true. One should not conclude from this by any means that what is ugly in a specific case might be doubtful. This is impossible, because the necessity of the beautiful is self-determined. On the other hand, ugliness is relative, since it cannot be measured by itself, but only through beauty. In everyday life, each might follow their personal taste, according to which one finds beautiful what another finds ugly, and considers ugly what another finds beautiful. Should we, however, wish to move this contingency of the empirical aesthetic judgment out of its uncertainty and lack of clarity, we must expose it to critique and thus put into practice the highest principles. The province of the conventionally beautiful, fashion, is full of phenomena that, judged according to the idea of the beautiful, could only be called ugly, and yet are allowed to pass temporarily for beautiful, not as if they were beautiful in and for themselves, but rather because the spirit of a time finds precisely in these forms the most fitting expression of its specificity, and grows accustomed to them. Through fashion, spirit seeks particularly things that correspond to its mood, which ugliness can also serve as a means of adequate representation. Past fashions, particularly those that have recently gone out of style, are thus as a rule judged ugly or comical, since the change in mood can only develop through the opposites. On that note, this last decade's fashion will be considered extremely ugly in about a decade and a half.
Yeah.
And rightfully so, because I don't know how in the world people can put on stuff like that and walk out in the street and not just feel utter shame. Because it's not just ugly, AW is just some old boomer, stuck in the 1950s. No, that shit is just bad design in every way. Bad color combinations, bad forms, bad combination of forms themselves. People wearing this fucking horrific, what do you call it? It's it's like somebody just took say tricks or those Fruit Loops, put them in their stomach, slightly digested them, and vomited right back, and called that beautiful. It's just an ugly mess. Zoomers are fucked. Oh man, I don't even know what it's called.
I don't know.
But you know what I'm talking about. I've seen quite a few of those. It's mainly pushed by
it's every person on Cut or Jubilee.
Yeah.
It's just Gen Z fashion. I don't know what else to call it. It'll be looked upon how the 80s fashion, the tacky fashion, is looked upon today.
Yeah, but compared to this, the 80s fashion is at least
You really want I mean, I know it's not everyone of the 80s, but remember, like, there were kids walking around with, like, power gloves on from Nintendo, and that aesthetic, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah,
It's so tacky.
it is tacky. But it's still better than this.
Maybe. I mean, again, relatively.
Relative, yeah.
Because they're both ugly.
So,
We're on the Roman.
mood can only develop through past fashions, particularly those that have recently gone out of style, are thus as a rule judged ugly or comical, since the change in mood can only develop through opposites. The Romans of Republican times, who subjugated the world, were clean-shaven. You know, I'm ambivalent sometimes because, like, in my own head, I go back between Caesar and Kaiser.
Oh, yeah.
I'm inconsistent about pronouncing.
We know it's Kaiser, but Caesar's fine.
Even Caesar and Augustus did not wear beards, and only beginning with Hadrian's Romantic epoch and the Roman Empire succumbed more and more to mounting barbarian hordes did the full, rich beard become fashionable, as if men, feeling weak, wanted to assure themselves of a certainty of manhood and boldness through the beard. Maybe it happened right like after he died, or it must have at least happened in his old age that like beards came back hard in Germany.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, you look at Hegel's generation, none of them have beards. Then you look at like the next big generation, all of them have fucking these huge fucking mustaches and beards.
Yeah, Feuerbach and so on. Brahms.
Yeah, Marx, Engels, Nietzsche. A bunch of people just had these, in my opinion, magnificent facial hair.
Mhm.
I mean, it's not like the scraggle like Muslim beard, which is just hideous. Like it's not styled at all. You know, like you can have like good looking facial hair, but like if you don't fucking style it, you don't do anything. Like yeah, it just fucking looks barbaric. 'Cause
A lot of earlier American presidents had beards. Yeah, there's like if you line them up, all of them up, it goes from like beard, 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 and then it starts getting clean shaven, and there hasn't been a bearded president in forever. Apparently, this is just a. I don't know if this is true or not. Some people attribute it to when women got the vote. I guess they found bearded men intimidating.
might be it.
Could be. I'm not sure.
So anyway, manhood and boldness are beauty. The aesthetically most memorable metamorphoses of fashion are offered by the history of the First French Revolution. They have been philosophically dissected by Hoff. Oh yeah, like, it was like the shift of fashion from the Baroque aristocracy to like the bourgeois sans-culotte,
Mm-hmm.
which is very striking. And then like that's kind of the fashion that like has remained up to now everywhere. Which I mean, okay, it looks good for what it is, but I'm kind of sick and tired of it. I would like a little bit more decorum to come back. Beauty is thus the limit of the entrance side of ugliness, while the comical is the limit on the exit side. Beauty excludes ugliness from itself, while the comical fraternizes with it, but in doing so neutralizes its disgust through the fact that, in comparison with beauty, it recognizes its relativity, its nullity. An investigation of the concept of ugliness and aesthetics of it thus finds its road precisely set out. It must begin with the recollection of the concept of beauty, not, however, for the purpose of expounding it in the fullness of its essence, as the metaphysics of beauty would be obliged to do, but only insofar as the basic conditions of beauty must be given, out of which and out of whose negation ugliness emerges. This investigation must then end with the concept of transformation, which ugliness experiences in becoming a means of humor. Naturally, the comical is also not presented in its full extent, but only touched upon insofar as the analysis of the transition demands it. So far, so good, I think.
Yeah.
We have a rough outline of the development. Starting with ugly, ending with comical. So maybe Satan is going to be made to the satanic is going to be made to be a joke.
Well, in a way, it is like in essence. One of the cool things, like there's a lot of like, weird contradictory like juxtapositions of descriptions of Satan at the beginning of Paradise Lost, where he's both like he's described as being like larger than everyone else, and at the same time like smaller than like, everyone else, in like almost the same sentences. Very interesting aesthetically. So negative in general. That ugliness is something negative is sufficiently clear from what has been said. The general concept of the negative, however, does not stand in any relation to that of ugliness, besides the simple one that ugliness also expresses a negative. The thought of the negative as such in its pure removal has no sensible form at all. What is incapable of sensible manifestation itself cannot become an object of aesthetics. Out of concepts of nothingness, of the other, of the immoderate, of the inessential, of the negative in general, as in the case of logical abstractions, no general experience or image can be given, because of such they are never capable of being perceived. Beauty is the idea as it works on the element of the sensible in the design of a harmonious totality. Ugliness, as a negation of beauty, shares with it the element of the sensible, and can thus not crop up in a purely ideal region, in which being exists only as the idea of being, with the reality of being as one of feeling space and time foreclosed. And as little as the concept of the negative in general may be called ugly, just so little is the term applicable to that other negative, the imperfect. Yeah, like the imperfect would be just a sheer lack of something, but like merely lacking does not make something ugly. Just makes it less beautiful.
Yeah, it's not an assertion of that finitude to extend.
Yeah.
It's still in process.
Mm-hmm. So the imperfect. In the sense in which the beautiful is essentially idea, it can also be said of it that it is the perfect. And in this way it happens often enough, notably also in the aesthetics of Baumgarten in the past century, that the concepts of beauty and perfection are taken to be the same. But perfection is a concept that does not correspond directly with that of beauty. An animal can be very well adapted. It can be very perfectly organized as a living thing, and for that very reason be extremely ugly, as are the camel, the sloth, the squid, the toad, etc. I don't think camels are that ugly. Sloths are kind of cute.
Sloths are fucking ugly, man.
Well, it depends which sloths.
Well,
There are some like tinier ones that aren't like the South American ones.
yeah. I don't know. I'd say there's some. Okay, they're ugly, but they're cute. It's because of their neoteny as animals that there's a kind of affectionate pity. Like they look ugly, but there's an affectionate pity towards them, kind of like a pug. Pugs are cute, but they are not pretty. They look like something's wrong, but they're very cute.
Yeah,
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I agree with that.
It's like beneath the ugliness, there's this kind of there is an innocent. That's how they are.
Yeah. Okay, I can kind of see why camels would be considered ugly. Their just design is awkward, like visually. You know, if you were just like abstractly coming up with like like what an animal like should look like camels look kind of weird.
If it's an ugliness that elicits pity, then there's a cuteness or a sympathy to it, and so that it's not like properly ugly. But something like a certain kinds of parasites or insects and stuff, they're actually ugly in a disgusting way.
Yeah. Actually, let me see. I got a pinned message. Where is this? Did I not pin the little list of like? No, I thought I did. I know I pasted the list of the what is it called? Table of contents for this, like on the Discord. I was trying to find it, but I guess I didn't. I know it's in the Hegelian chat, but it was just like to be able to have it on the side to reference. Anyways, because then we can say like, oh, which level of ugliness where does this belong to? Actually,
You could screenshot it and then send it in a message. And
no, that's what I did.
reference it.
It's just it's in the Hegel thing. Mentions. There you go. Thank you. Yeah, where's the camel? Is the camel incorrect? No. It's disharmonious. Clumsy. So camel would be repulsive. Yeah, camel kind of looks clumsy.
I think camels are cool.
They are.
Oh, I do too.
They're pretty metal. They can eat like straight up like spiked
A
cactuses.
cactus is actually piercing through their own lip.
Yeah, like they don't give a fuck.
Bactrian camels look awesome.
But yeah, his point about perfection not being identical with beauty is pretty true. At least regarding like relative perfections. So the squid, I agree. The squid is ugly as sin. Hate those things. Somehow, like octopuses are kind of cute. Squid just aren't. Toads are definitely ugly. Frogs can be kind of cute, depending on like if like they're the Salvadorian like cool looking ones.
Mm-hmm.
Octopi they look cerebral because of their head looks like a brain, and then also their eyes are oriented towards the front and very circular, which has a human-esque look to it. Whereas a squid, the eyes are drawn over to the side, which gives them a kind of like a fish-like, like non-human quality. And then also, their head simply just extends backwards. It doesn't have the oval-like, brain-like shape. So it's lacking the kind of humanizing features.
Yeah. So it's continuing. A mistaken subjective thought, an incorrect concept, an error, a false judgment, a faulty conclusion, on the other hand, are imperfections of the intelligence which cannot, however, be assimilated into the category of the aesthetic. Virtues that have just been acquired, that is to say, which are not yet practiced with the virtuosity of habit, make, ethically speaking, an impression of imperfection, but may be aesthetically almost endlessly charming in their purposeful pleasure of becoming. An ugly character, on the other hand, means just as much as an evil one. Virtues that have just been acquired, which are not yet practiced with the virtuosity of habit, make, ethically speaking, an impression of perfection, but may be aesthetically almost endlessly charming in their purposeful pleasure of becoming. Not quite sure what he's talking about there. The only thing that comes to mind is like maybe like a way in which you may present aesthetically, say a story of a child, trying to practice their virtues. obviously they don't know quite like how to do things right, how to judge things properly entirely. But in their trying and like doing all these mistakes, despite making errors and even harming some people, in that same manner though, it's still aesthetically like charming. Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Yeah, like when children do things that adults do, but they don't have the capacity to do them yet. People view that as cute or aesthetically pleasing. Maybe that's not quite the same because he's trying to draw out the beginning stages of a virtue that has been mastered. But the beginning is still something that may be aesthetically pleasing, is what I'm getting from this text or sentence.
Yeah, it seems to be what's in mind. So anyways, the concept of imperfection is relative. It always depends on the standard by which we proceed to measure it. The leaf is imperfect in comparison to the flower to the fruit, if one weighs the value of the flower against the fruit as the mode of existence of the plant. But the flower, which is counted imperfect in a botanical, or better yet economic register, generally ranks higher than the fruit aesthetically. Imperfection is, in this connection, so little related to ugliness that it can even outrank what, according to reality in totality, is more perfect. If the drive of the authentic, the true and beautiful is active in what is imperfect, then it might also be beautiful, if not as beautiful as it might have been in its perfection. The first works of a true artist, for example, will betray many deficiencies, but already radiate a genius capable of greater accomplishment. The youthful poems of Schiller or Byron are still imperfect, but betray nevertheless the future of their makers, often precisely in the manner of their imperfection. Literature-wise, I would say that Philip K. Dick is a great example of this, in which sadly he never quite perfected it, but like you could see that he improved markedly over time. And like he began with like some big bangs, quite frankly. Not in short.
The Transmigration of Timothy Archer is perfect. Come on.
I haven't finished that one, honestly. I got like somewhere about like a third through, and I just zoned out.
All right.
I gotta go back to it. Like his short stories, I'm not a fan of his short stories. I have a collection of like 20 hours of like read audiobook versions of them. I think I listened to about like 2 hours worth of them, and I just could not get into like the vast majority of them. Out of all of those, I think I only liked one that was like maybe a half an hour long. But as far as like his like full like book length ones, from the very early ones to the later ones, I like all of them.
Yeah.
And you can see that like, what is it? I think like is Eye in the Sky is like one of his earliest ones, and that starts out so incredibly strong that it's disappointing where it goes like about halfway, because it's so good in the first half. But as like he gets more into like his writings, like that issue becomes less and less.
Yes. Okay, a better example, one I don't think you've read yet, but Thomas Pynchon. His first novel is pretty good, but it points toward, the greatness that would come after it. Whereas his short stories, when he first published them, were not even, like collected until 1984 because, they're terrible. It's in a collection called Slow Learner, and it's very accurate because he didn't know how to write back then at all. You would not read Slow Learner and then imagine that this guy is capable of writing Gravity's Rainbow or even V, really.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, in V, I can see, okay, Gravity's Rainbow is possible. Mason and Dixon is possible.
Yeah. There's also that they choose subject matters and they attempt technical things that are out of their like full capacity to like execute and grasp, but the vision is so high that like the failure of it is still impressive.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what's really in line. What he's really talking about here. That like these people have like such a high aim that even in like failing to reach it, sometimes even like in many ways catastrophically, everything else they executed like so well because it's so far above like the cut of everything else.
Yeah. Byron and Schiller's early works, but their later works are considered perfect. And I would agree.
Mm-hmm.
So they did achieve their aim.
Continuing. The word imperfection in the sense of incipience should thus not be confused with the concept of the bad, for which we do at times euphemistically employ it. The imperfect as a necessary step in development is after all a stage on the way to perfection. The bad, on the other hand, is a reality which does not simply leave something to be desired, which does not simply awake a longing for greater perfection, but is something which gets caught up in positive contradiction to its concept. The imperfect, in a positive sense, lacks only the further formation that would allow it to show itself to be wholly what it already is in itself. The bad, however, is something imperfect in the negative sense, comprising something else altogether, something that should not be. A drawing can be still imperfect and yet beautiful. A bad drawing is a faulty one, which contradicts the laws of aesthetics. Yep. Foremost for our investigation is the correct understanding of the comparative sense of beauty, which is to be found in art itself, and which can be expressed thus. Just because something is more beautiful than something else, it does not follow that the less beautiful something is ugly. Rather, this is a gradual difference, which does not yet alter the quality of beauty in itself. First and foremost, one has to remember that every species is coordinated to some genus, even if among themselves they can stand in a relationship of subordination. From the point of view of the genus, all species are equal, and yet this does not exclude the possibility that in direct comparison one should stand objectively higher than another. Architecture, sculpture, painting, music, and poetry are, as species of art, all perfectly equal. And yet it is true that in the order here given they also express a progression in which the next art surpasses the previous in its range of possibility of adequately representing the essence of spirit, freedom.
Huh. Notably missing from that list, video games.
Well, we've gone over that. I mean, it's worth commenting here because I mean it's highly related. I have a series. I know it's like most people don't care because it's original to me. So if it does not have Hegel in the title, nobody gives a shit about what I say. So like the series that I posted on like my own like conceptualization of why video games could be and ultimately are not art. I think like those videos have gotten probably in the dozens of views at most. And in that, it's one like the game part of video games just isn't amenable to art. There's many ways in which you can dream of how cool it would be to express aesthetic concepts in the gameplay itself, and then you realize that it's the kind of thing where it's only cool if you think about it abstractly, and then if you actually try to do it concretely, it would just suck as a game, and people would not enjoy it because it takes away player control.
It ceased to be a game.
Yeah. At best, it becomes a kind of interactive gallery.
Yeah, and those exist.
Yes, they do.
Not very fun to play.
Yeah. On the other thing is, so the artistic side of games tends to be like their music and their story. And if you abstract those from like, the gameplay itself, yeah, a lot of these games can have some like pretty damn good music-wise. Like they can be pretty good, especially when they try to have a unified theme developed through the music.
which very few games try, by the way. But when they do, like they do pretty well. It seems to me like there's a lot of great composers in the video game scene. They're mostly Japanese. I don't see that the Western developers
Spyro the Dragon.
care much. Besides that, I love Spyro's like OST, man.
Yeah.
I was listening to the OST for the first Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver. It sounds sick.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Deus Ex.
Oh, Deus Ex has really good music. So there is good music, but it's not like a lot of it to me doesn't feel like as unified as some like Japanese games where like the Japanese take like their video games a lot more seriously than Westerners did for most of the time. Despite like how frivolous they are with it at the same time. Story-wise, I think the Japanese tend to aspire to lofty metaphysical stories, which often, despite having that aspiration, because of the severely bad execution, and it's not just like an imperfection in this case, it's just bad. It's ugly. There's stuff in which you're like, why'd you do this? It literally would have been like a 2-sentence change to fix this, a 2-second like addition to fix this. Greed, stupidity, corporate overlordship, I don't know, but like there's a lot of failures. As far as like RPGs, Western RPGs are loftier still than JRPGs for sure, but like Western RPGs for the most part, the good ones are almost entirely locked to like the PCs from like the early 2000s. So many people didn't know about those and didn't play those. Even then, like the aspect of gameplay just infects what can be done story-wise, so that they are just like severe failures of execution that are inherent to the game design itself. So that a lot of these could have great stories that were perfect if only they had not been games. But then one wonders that if they had not been games, they wouldn't have been that interesting to most people to begin with, so they would have been utterly unknown. So, is it better that they might have been like more perfected masterpieces as like, novels, but like, even less people care, or like that they managed this much being video games and at least being played and known by far more people. It's probably better that they were games in the end.
But games can be beautiful, of course.
Yep. Let's continue. In the individual arts, the same consideration holds for the qualitative differences in an art. In the individual arts, the same consideration holds, for the qualitative differences in an art behave in relation to the whole as species. If one considers this, one rises above all the disputes as to which species should be preferred, because one will never, through subordination, forget the coordination of them all. Poetry, for example, is objectively perfected as dramatic poetry. Lyric and epic are in this respect subordinate to it. But from this it does not follow that lyric and epic, which are necessary forms of poetry, do not enjoy the same absoluteness. Seen relatively, the art of building is less perfect than sculpture less perfect than painting, and so forth, and yet within the peculiarity of its material and form, every art can achieve absoluteness. In other words, this means emphatically that subordination as such stands in absolutely no relation to ugliness. When one designates, as we must, an art or genus of art as lower or less perfect than another, this implies no aesthetic demotion of it. But it is so only relatively, without involving the concept of a somehow necessary ugliness emerging from this hierarchy. In the case of individual works of art, it is common to express the comparative of beauty through simple ascriptions of quality. One says, for instance, that Munchausen is Immermann's greatest work, and one wants, in any case, also to say that it is thus this mostly beautiful.
and one wants in any case also to say that it is thus his most beautiful. Less beautiful, on the other hand, is by no means the same as ugly.
Having read no other novel by Immerman, I agree.
Yep.
Because I'm not even sure the others even survived.
I think there's like a couple like famous like movies from like the 80s or 90s
Yeah,
based
there
on
are.
that.
Yeah, Baron von Munchausen
Yeah,
movies.
which apparently a lot of One Piece rips off.
Oh, okay. That doesn't improve my opinion of it, but it's nice to know.
And I've been meaning to watch those movies. So the naturally ugly. In nature, to whose idea existence in time and space is essential, ugliness can already take on innumerable forms. Becoming, which is basic to all things in nature, perpetually makes possible, through its process, excess and disproportion, thus disturbance of the pure form which nature in itself pursues, and thus ugliness. The individual natural existences, which in heterogeneous chaos push through to real being, often impede one another in their morphological processes. That is true. I hadn't even thought about that. When you want to design something quite ugly, a lot of it is make something that's constantly like morphing, like as a blob of some sorts. Like there's beautiful things in the divine which are kind of like slightly amorphous, but not completely, in that they still retain a stability of form, even though that form is kind of ethereal, not as solid.
Yeah. I thought you were going to use the example of the self-transforming machine elves.
Nah, I mean, I'm thinking
But yeah,
like...
the ugly amorphous blobs are constantly never beautiful. Consistently never achieving a beautiful form. It's like just different forms of ugliness.
Yeah.
Here's another low example, but well, not that low. That I don't know what it's called, but the being from Spirited Away that just like keeps changing after he eats people or whatever.
No Face.
Yeah, No Face.
Yeah.
And then his beauty is going back to how he used to be after he's saved.
I think this is pretty in line with what Hegel thinks. In the philosophy of nature, he comments how the natural forms are always externally determined. So there is no perfect form in nature. It's always, it's in nature to have a variety of different forms for one concept. And because of this, he says that nothing in nature, the sun, moon, stars, animals, plants, they're worthy of our veneration, as opposed to art, which may depict these forms.
Yeah.
The stars are gleaming leprosy in the sky.
That they are. Hello, Rhett. We are on page 46 of the Aesthetics of Ugliness by Karl Rosenkranz. So let's see. The geometric and the stereometric forms, triangle, square, circle, prism, cube, sphere, etc., are in their simplicity, through the symmetry of the relations, really beautiful. As general forms in abstract purity, they indeed only exist ideally in the imagination, since, in concreto, they only appear as the forms of certain natural patterns found in crystals, plants, and animals. The way of nature here is the transformation from the rigidity of straight line and flat surface relations to the suppleness of the curve, and a wonderful fusion of the straight and the sinuous. brute, raw mass, insofar as it is only governed by the law of gravity, offers us, in aesthetic terms, an indifferently neutral state. It is not necessarily beautiful, but also not necessarily ugly. It is accidental. If we take, for instance, our planet Earth, in order for it to be beautiful as a mass, it ought to be a perfect sphere. But it is not. It flattens at the poles and bulges at the equator, and besides, its surface is of the greatest inequality of elevation. A profile of the Earth's crust, regarded only stereometrically, shows us the most casual disorder of elevations and depressions in erratic outlines. In the same way, we cannot say of the surface of the moon, with its confusion of highs and lows, that it is beautiful. The silver disk of the moon, seen from a distance as a simple luminous body, is beautiful. But this agglomeration of cones, rills, and valleys is not. The lines which describe the planets in their motion as multiple ellipses in spiral orbits cannot be regarded as aesthetic objects, for they only appear as lines in our drawings. The infinity of the mass of stars, on the other hand, works on our sense of sight not through mass, but through light. For some admirers of the twinkling night sky, a certain illusion of fantasy also creeps in through the naming of constellations. The lyre, Lyra, the swan, Cygnus, Berenice's hair, Coma Berenices, Hercules, Perseus, and so on. Doesn't that sound pretty? Modern astronomy has become very prosaic in its nomenclature, in that the sextant, the telescope, the air pump, the printing workshop, and the other important inventions are glorified with constellations. Yeah, I assume that if we name constellations these days, were it not for the background of already having them named by prior civilizations, we probably would name them stupid shit like the sextant or telescope. That mechanical actions, pushing, throwing, falling, swinging, can become beautiful is not directly conditioned by the form of the movement, but also to the composition of the objects and their velocity. A swing, for instance, is not exactly ugly as it swings, but not beautiful either. If one were to imagine, however, a young girl on a swing, gracefully rocking back and forth through the bright spring air, the scene is one of carefree beauty. The bold launch of a rocket, which lights up the dark and explodes at its zenith, seemingly fraternizing with the starry sky, is beautiful not just through the mechanical motion, but also through its light and speed. The dynamic processes of nature are in themselves neither beautiful nor ugly, because in them form does not attain to any expressiveness. Cohesion, magnetism, electricity, galvanism, chemistry are in their effectiveness simple in themselves. But the results can be beautiful, like the sputter of electrical sparks, the zigzag of a lightning bolt, the majestic roll of thunder, the changing color of chemical processes, and so on. A huge field is here opened up by the fantastic images that develop out of gas in its elastic mobility. Its great freedom brings out not only beautiful but also ugly forms. The basic form of gas expansion is in any case spherical, pushing outward in all directions simultaneously. But because gas expands into the immeasurable, it loses its spherical shape immediately, where it meets solid bodies or other gases with which it mixes and dissolves chaotically. What an endlessly rich, inexhaustible play of twilight forms, reminiscent of everything and nothing, the clouds offer us. For organic nature, the principle of its existence consists in closure of form. It follows that beauty here frees itself of the dreamy contingency to which, in inorganic nature, it adheres. The organic entity has a definite aesthetic character right away because it is a real individual. For this very reason, ugliness is possible in a much more definite way. It is the task of the specialized study of natural beauty to follow nature's progress in this regard. We cannot go into particular detail, and refer here to the fine works of Bernardin St. Pierre, Oersted, and von Vischer. In general, the eurythmia, symmetry, and harmony of form and nature rise from the simple crystalline entities through the struggle of the straight and sinuous lines of the plant world to the countless configurations of the animal world, wherein with thousand-sided oscillations and hybridizations the curve triumphs, a process which at the same time involves an endless metamorphosis and gradation of color. Individual crystals on their own are beautiful. In an aggregate state with many of them amassed together, they often appear in fantastic combinations, as can be seen from the handsome exemplars in Schmidt's Mineralienbuch, or Book of Minerals. The great aggregate masses on the Earth's surface are of the most varied and often indefinite form. Mountains can look beautiful when they stretch out in gently sloping, pure lines, sublime when they tower like colossal ramparts, ugly when they divert the eye to their jagged outline in the desert and their characterless tangle. I don't know, I think those are pretty cool. Comical when they tease our fantasy with bizarre and grotesque digressions. In immediate reality, these forms acquire other peculiar attractions through lighting. How moonlight augments the wonder of the Aomatu, or five horse heads, Wu Ma To, part of Wu Ma Kue Tsao Shan, the five horses who return to eat. The Bohea Tea Hills, Wu Yi Shan, and the Tsitsin, Qixing, or Seven Star Mountain in China. Between the chemical composition and the form, another correlation takes place, which von Hausmann in a classic treatise has shown to hold also for the relation of terrain type to vegetation and plant life. The cooling of the once incandescent crust and the play of water and air have drawn the broad lineaments of the Earth's physiognomy. Plants are almost all beautiful. Poisonous plants, according to ancient theology, ought to be ugly, and it is precisely they who offer us an exuberant bounty of delicate forms and exquisite colors. Their narcotic power can indeed bring death to living things, but of what concern is this to the plant? Is killing part of its concept? Narcosis can well have lethal effects, but it can also delight through intoxication. Indeed, it can save life from illness. Poison is a very relative concept, and the Greek word pharmakon designates poison as well as remedy. By the way, there's some crazy motherfucker, I found him on YouTube years ago, probably maybe 6 years ago, who decided he wanted to be kind of like a cool like an assassin, like in the movies, where you become immune to poisons. So he had this whole bunch of snakes that were poisonous, and he started slowly injecting himself with venom from all of them. After about 5 years, he was pretty immune to all of them. He could still be killed. He was still working on becoming fully immune, if you can do so, I don't know. But he had become immune enough that instead of being poisons to him now, they were actually like drugs. They got him high, but it also had health effects, positive ones. Which actually makes perfect sense. I mean, if you're constantly putting your immune system under a controlled stress, by which it has to strengthen itself and fight back, yeah, you're probably going to be healthier overall. Check something this. All right. Continuing. But because the plant is alive, it can also become ugly. Life as freedom of formation necessarily introduces this possibility. In groups, plants can overgrow and crowd one another, and thus grow ugly in self-caused deformation. They can be violently attacked from the outside, arbitrarily molded and botched. They can also wither and degenerate from the inside through illness. With illness, a crippling and discoloration can develop and indeed be felt as ugly. In all these cases, the natural cause of ugliness is quite obvious. It is, for life in the plant, no foreign satanic principle at work. Rather, the plant itself, that as a living thing sickens, and as a consequence of sickness, forfeits its normal form in tumors, desiccation, dwarfing, and fusion, and its normal complexion through bleaching and discoloration. In itself alien to the plant is the violence that is done to it by storm, water, fire, animals, and humans. This violence can make the plant ugly, but can also beautify it. This depends on the specific nature of the action. The storm can scatter the foliage and splinter the branches of an oak, thus crippling the proud tree, but it can also, as it blows with rhythmic strokes through the leafy branches, really bring to light the pith and energy of the tree's beauty and movement. Yeah, if you've never seen there's a few videos on the internet, but like there are some of like trees swaying in the wind with heavy rainstorms. It is pretty aesthetic as fuck. Also, him talking about like storms scattering foliage, splintering the branches of an oak. I think here we go. Let's see if this shows up. As you can see, that's a trunk of a tree that looks like an angel. Yeah, that was split to pieces. It's what IAPA posted in Entertainment Art channel. So leafy branches really bring to light the pith and energy of the tree's beauty and movement. Normal changes in the metamorphosis of a plant are free of ugliness, since because they are necessary, they are in no way pathological. The passage of bud to blossom, of blossom to fruit, is accompanied by silent, unspeakable delight. When in autumn the chlorophyll drains from the leaves and these dye themselves in 1,000 yellow, brown, and red tints, countless picturesque effects result, and how beautiful is the view of the golden crop when the nourishing grains ripen and yellow, that is, when they dry up. Greater than with plants is the possibility of ugliness in the animal kingdom, because here the richness of forms grows towards infinity, and life becomes more energetic and self-centered. To understand quite literally intensified. To understand the ugliness of animal form correctly, we have to ponder the fact that nature above all aims to protect life and the species, and that for this purpose treats beauty in the individual with indifference. This explains why nature spawns some truly ugly animals, that is, animals that do not become ugly through mutilation or age or disease, but for which an ugly form is constitutive. For our aesthetic judgment, there creep in here many errors, partly through familiarity with a type, which we then tend to call beautiful, and deviations from it ugly, partly through the isolation of an animal in the abstract manner shown to us in an etching or a specimen in a collection. How entirely different an animal seems to us when viewed alive in its natural surroundings: the frog in water, the lizard in grass or in a crevice, the ape climbing a tree, the polar bear on the ice floe, and so on. Crystals with a rigid regularity, when constrained in the act of formation, can develop in ways that are empirically imperfect, but in their constant resides the beauty of stereometric form. Plants can become maimed or wilt from the inside out and lose their form, but in accordance with their concept, they are beautiful. If they seem ugly in some instances, the formlessness is instantly softened through a comic expression like the face of the cactus, the beet, the cucurbits, gourds, pumpkins, the latter of which are indeed often used to produce fantastic comical figures in paintings. I don't know, gourds are pretty cool, man. They make very nice aesthetic containers for drinks. They also make pretty good instruments, like little mini drums and maracas. With animals, on the other hand, it is undeniable that they are forms of original ugliness, whose horrid visage cannot be cheered up by any comic expression. The real motive for these forms is the necessity of nature to incorporate the animal organism into the various elements, zones, and soil types, and to lead it through the various periods of the earth. Subjecting itself to this necessity, it must vary each type, for instance, the dog, infinitely. Certain jellyfish, squid, caterpillars, spiders, rays, lizards, frogs, toads, rodents, pachyderms, apes are positively ugly. They are. Some of these animals are important to us, or at least interesting, such as the electric ray. Others impress us in their ugliness through their size and strength, like the hippopotamus, the rhinoceros.
He almost had me.
The camel, the elephant, the giraffe.
Yeah. Rhinos, yeah. Fully grown, but all of these as babies are cute. Elephants, giraffes.
Well, giraffes are ugly.
Baby giraffes aren't ugly.
No, they are one of the few animals that are ugly. Like they're like so disproportionate
Yeah.
in an awful way. Like it's just
Yeah, but the babies are cute. When they get when they become adults, they're like huge and their necks are way too long for their body.
yeah, but even as babies, like one, like they have the little tufts of hair on top, which are ugly.
Yeah, that's
Their
true.
snouts are too pointy for like what they are. Like they don't have like the little round cuteness of like puppies or whatever. Eh. I agree
Okay.
with him. Giraffes are ugly.
If they're so ugly, why Toys R Us use it as their logo?
Well, they didn't use a photo.
Because KB Toys is superior. No, I don't know.
Elephants aren't ugly. I mean, they're
No.
cool. I mean, the trunks are kind of like disturbing abstractly, but that's about it. So let's see. So at times the animal world takes a comic turn, as with some egrets, toucans, penguins, and with some mice and primates. Yeah, penguins are kind of funny. Many animals are beautiful. How beautiful are some conches, butterflies, beetles, snakes, doves, parrots, horses. We see that ugly forms originate primarily in the transitions of the animal kingdom, because through them a certain contradiction, a fluctuation between disparate types manifests itself in outer form. And that's why, not like, yeah, like Neanderthals and stuff, like it's kind of this part way between like, apes and us, and they weren't very pretty.
What about platypuses? Platypi.
They're cute.
Yeah, but they're transitionary creatures.
They are. Like, if you were to say like I want an animal and like you had to like make it up yourself, you wouldn't come up with a platypus. But a kid totally would. A platypus is kind of like, yeah, like it's one of those that, like if God has a sense of humor, the platypus would definitely be kind of evidence of it. It's a good joke, though.
Yeah.
Let's see, many amphibians, for instance, are ugly because they are at once land and water animals. Maybe like that kind of sort of makes sense, but at the same time, like there's a good amount of frogs that are just like beautiful, like especially like Amazonian frogs and stuff. But those are tree frogs, yeah, so they're not so amphibious. They are still fish, and they aren't an amphibole that comes to light inwardly and outwardly in their structure and behavior. The monstrous shapes of prehistory came to be thus, namely the giant organisms had to adapt to extreme states of terrain and temperature. Ichthyosaurs and flying lizards, giant reptiles equipped with fins, these alone could endure those boundless swamps, that blazing, steamy, scorching atmosphere that was almost like twice as thick as ours today, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
I did not know that apparently, like, if you sent a human being back to those conditions, like, the atmosphere would be so oxygen rich that you could like run marathon style without like getting tired for hours.
What's an ichthyosaur?
Probably a fake dinosaur like most of them back then.
Looks like a...
Or imagine a dolphin and then extend
Yeah.
its bill, give it teeth, and make its eyes a little more. They could
Yeah,
make
looks
it
like
less
a-
mammalian, more reptilian.
Looks like a mix of a dolphin and an alligator gar.
Yeah, Gar is a great comparison.
Yeah. Let's Let's see. The variety of those terrestrial conditions had to take shape also in the variety of animal form. And still we find such hybrid beings in places where the terrain is still not fully developed and the vegetation virginal, as with the Australian platypus. The animal can thus be ugly in its very type. The individual can also, in the case of an originally beautiful type, become ugly. Through crippling or illness, it can be subject to exterior or interior deformation, respectively, as are plants. In both cases, its ugliness far exceeds that of plants, because its organism is far more united and sealed, while the plant grows and entwines itself in undefined space, and thus its form is liable to a certain contingency. By contrast, the structure of the animal is in and for itself definite. For those who don't know what amphibole is, it's a Greek etymology of both, plus throw. It's a grammatical term used since Kant to denote ambiguous expressions whose words are themselves unambiguous. For example, every boy loves a mother, taken distributively and taken to be about one mother.
We all love the same mother.
Ambiguous expressions whose words are themselves unambiguous. Interesting. As a consequence, should a limb be wounded or taken away, the animal would become immediately uglier. An animal can dispense with no part of its organism, with the exception of the vegetative excess of hair, horns, etc., which it can regrow. From a rose bush, one can pluck a rose without harming the plant or its beauty. One cannot cut away the wing of a bird or hack off the tail of a cat without detracting from its form and its enjoyment of life. I don't know, some people who dock their dog's ears would disagree, and there are some insane people who will cut their tails and also try to do it with cats, make a bobcat. On the other hand, due to this a priori articulation of the animal form closed in itself, ugliness can also occur through an excess alien to its concept. The limbs of the animal organism are precisely defined as to number and position, for they must interact harmoniously. A limb more or placed elsewhere than where the concept would have it contradicts the basic form and makes it ugly. For instance, should a sheep be born with 8 legs, this doubling of the number necessary to it is a monstrosity and ugly. Spider sheep.
Wow.
This careful development of the animal form, which develops definite proportions from the inside out, results in the fact that each member has its normal size, decided by the so-called balance of the organs, and also that when this size is increased or decreased, a disproportion results which is necessarily of an ugly kind. Such excessive size or excessive smallness is, however, usually already the result of illness, whose origin can also be an inherited condition developing from the very depths of its life. Deformation can begin already in the egg, in the sperm, in the uterus, in the fetus. Disease first destroys the organism partially, then totally, and discoloration and disfiguration are usually correlated with this destruction. The more beautiful an animal is in its concept, the more ugly will the appearance of its wizened, emaciated, swollen, pallid, ulcerated form. The horse is undisputedly the most beautiful animal. I'm sorry, no. They're cute.
I don't
They're
know.
not. They're not the most beautiful animal.
Undisputedly. So
They're a beautiful animal.
Yeah.
The most beautiful.
yeah, he said the most undisputably.
I'd
Undisputedly.
argue it's a lion or something.
Yeah, lion would definitely be above a horse. I mean, like, horses are known for like their magnificence.
Mhm.
Like, as far as like their musculature, their power, their character, and like the magnificent flowing mane. That's their beauty.
Yes.
But measured with the beauty of freedom, are there freer animals? I think so. That express visually their beauty, that freedom. Yeah, I'd say like a tiger, for example, is like above a horse in that.
No,
No.
no, the horse is so beautiful it doesn't need to attack us on sight. It allows us to ride on it.
See, for this very reason.
A symmetrical tiger. I mean, William Blake exemplified this perfectly. It's the perfect picture of beauty. You know, that's why it's so dangerous.
I mean, my
The
favorite,
symmetrical tiger.
my favorite is the not the Bengal. What is it called? Siberian white tiger.
Yeah.
Golden tigers are pretty cool. So, anyways, continuing. For this very reason, it is the one that through disease, age, rheumy eyes, hanging belly, protruding bones, visible ribs, and spotty baldness looks particularly repulsive. They do. I mean, have you ever seen a horse in a bad shape? It is a very sick sight. From what was said thus far, it follows that the ugliness of animal form, whether we regard it as original or produced through accident and illness, is just for us sufficiently explicable, so that we do not, like Dobb in his Judas Iscariot, to entertain the hypothesis of something unnatural in nature as its cause. The necessity of nature to unite contrasts in one organism, throwing mammals such as whales and seals into the water, others such as bats into the air, and preparing chelonians, saurians, and batrachians as much for a stay on land as in water, is just as clear as the necessity of chance that violently cripples an animal from the outside or deforms it from the inside through illness. Thus, the lust for blood of the carnivores and the poison of some animals, including the stink which some disseminate for their defense, has as little to do with their beauty or ugliness as the poison of a plant does with its form, hardly needs to be noted. Were the supernaturalist hypothesis of the origin of ugliness through an evil that has corrupted nature true, then the predators and poisonous snakes would also have to be ugly on principle, which is so little the case, that on the contrary the poison-fanged snakes and the wild cats are distinguished through beauty, indeed through splendor. The unnatural, however, has in fact no application to nature, since, lacking freedom of consciousness and will, nature is unable to break a law intentionally. For animals, there exists no law of self-respect and filial piety, and thus also no crime against it. Self-dirtying, incest, and infanticide are concepts that only belong to the world of minds, and it is false sentimentality to be appalled by the misdeeds of the animal world, which does not judge them as such. Ordinarily, we also do not have such items in mind when we speak of natural beauty and ugliness, but rather, usually, what we imagine is the beauty of landscape, which gathers in itself all natural forms into a characteristic unity. Landscape is monotonous, where one of the natural forms rules its... Landscape is monotonous, where one of the natural forms rules it elementarily. The mountain, the stream, the forest, the desert, and so on. Or it is full of contrasts, where two forms oppose one another in it. Or it is harmonious, where an opposition dissolves into a higher unity. Each of these basic forms can go through an endless multiplicity of phases, through the cycle of hours and seasons. What aesthetic impression a landscape can make depends above all on lighting. A desert can be sublime, terribly sublime, when the tropical sun burns through it as through the deep-lying Sahara, melancholically sublime, when the moon of the temperate zones with the silver light shimmers over it as if over the high Gobi. But each of the basic forms of landscape can appear ugly as well as beautiful. Monotony, though reputed to be ugliness, reaches it first through the indifference of absolute shapelessness, like the leaden, flat, stagnant sea under a gray sky with no wind. All right. That's a good place to stop, I think. Or actually, let me see. Intellectually ugly, how long is that? 42. 42 to 46. Actually, yeah, we can go through intellectually ugly. like intellectual ugliness is something that, if I'm guessing right, is something that people commonly intuit and even speak of regularly. And yet when it comes to just like becoming aware of aesthetics as such, is hardly ever mentioned as far as I can tell. So anyways, the intellectually ugly. If we move from nature to spirit, we shall have to begin by saying that the absolute aim of spirit is truth and good, to which it subordinates beauty, just as organic nature has subordinated it to its absolute aim, life. Christ, the ideal of freedom, we do not imagine as ugly exactly, but also not as beautiful in the Greek manner. What we call the beauty of the soul is the concept of the goodness and purity of the will, and such a thing can live in a common, indeed an ugly, body. The will in and for itself, in the seriousness of its holiness, exceeds the aesthetic element. Conscience, with its practical content, does not inquire about the form in which it appears. The intimacy of a loving mind lets one forget the rough manners, poor dress, possible errors in speech, etc., of the one acting. But it is natural that truth and goodness of the will result in a dignity of personal bearing which pushes outward all the way to sensible appearance, insofar justifying Lichtenberg's saying that all virtue makes beautiful, all vice makes ugly. This saying, true in itself, could be expressed yet more generally by saying that all feeling and consciousness of freedom make beautiful, and all unfreedom makes ugly. We want to take freedom here only in the sense of an unlimited self-determination, abstracting from the truth of its content. The organism is once and for all determined to mean nothing for itself, but only as the tool of the spirit that shines through it. We can observe the truth of this concept in the races and social classes. With growing freedom, the beauty of the appearance grows as well. Aristocratic houses become more beautiful because they feel freer, because they are emancipated from the bondage of nature, because they have more leisure and fill this with play, love, armed exercise, and poetry. The islanders of the South Seas were beautiful as long as they lived in the dance, in combat, in love, and in the enjoyment of sea bathing. The blacks of Dahomey and Benin are beautiful because they combine martial courage and mercantile enterprise with sensuous well-being. For this reason, they also take an interest in beauty. The king has a bodyguard of several thousand Amazons, truly beautiful and brave girls, of whom A. Boué has given us drawings. Whoever receives a gift from the king expresses his thanks through a dance, that is, through an ascetic act in public before the assembled people. I assume he's talking about that one country or whatever, like they had a movie made like 2 or 3 years ago, you know, there was like the all-woman army that he had, and they happened to be slavers too. Yeah, Woman King, that's
Woman
the one.
King.
Even the person who, from a moral point of view, is in part bad or even evil, can nevertheless show beauty, inasmuch as beside his vices and non-virtues, he can still possess virtues, even a soul. Namely, he will often possess formal freedom, cleverness, prudence, sobriety, self-control, perseverance, through which criminals may even stand out with a certain knightly flair and nobility. In this province, strange wonders can be found. A Ninon de Lenclos was certainly beautiful and no less gallant than beautiful, but she was free of petty considerations. She was gallant with feeling and grace, and thus remained beautiful. She gave out her favor freely after inclination, but she did not sell it. Definitely not a hoe. Yeah, I'm not being ironic either. Just because the body in relation to mind can only lay claim to a symbolic value, it is possible that a person in the body can even be ugly, lopsided, and irregular of facial features, pockmarked, and yet he can make us not only forget all this, but further, that he can animate these unhappy forms from the inside out with an expression whose charm draws us irresistibly. As the ugly Mirabeau knew how to passionately captivate the most beautiful women as soon as they allowed him to speak, as Shakespeare's Richard III, in a spirited and sovereign fashion, is able to obtain at the bier of Henry VI the love of Anna, who had at first cursed him, And as Alcibiades in Plato's Symposium says of Socrates, that silent he is ugly, but on speaking he is beautiful. We all knew somebody in high school who had that charm.
Yep.
That evil, as the intellectually ugly, once it becomes habitual, must make a human physiognomy ugly, lies in its essence, since it is that unfreedom that originates in the free negation of veritable freedom. The habitus and physiognomy of happy primitive peoples can be beautiful because they enjoy a freedom that is, at least initially, natural. The unfreedom that consists of knowing that evil is evil and wanting it nevertheless contains the deepest contradiction of the will with its idea, a contradiction that must betray itself outwardly as well. Individual wrongs and vices achieve their own physiognomic specificity. Jealousy, hate, lies, greed, and lust work out their own strange forms. One thus notices in female thieves an unsure, sideways look, whose movement the French call furete, from Latin fur, from English furtive related, which in its cursory sharpness, its secretively conspicuous groping, has something terrible about it. If one has visited large prisons and stepped into halls where 60 to 100 female thieves sometimes sit and stew together, one recognizes this specific gaze of the prowling, restless eye as almost the gaze of the species. Ugliness becomes even greater, naturally, when evil is wanted in and for itself. But as paradoxical as it sounds, through the fact that evil in this case fixes itself as a systematic totality, a certain harmony of the will is regained in an appearance generally that aesthetically softens the form. The aberration of individual vices can often have a more disagreeable, cruder expression than absolute evil, which in its negativity is once again whole. A coarse vice is conspicuous in its one-sidedness. Absolute evil, in the depths or rather shallows, penetrates with its intensity both face and habitus in analogous ways and can exist without offering to criminal justice any particular material it can use. Rich salon denizens thoroughly licked by culture, indulging every profligacy, wallowing in the finest refinements of egoism, flirting with the seduction of women, in the torment of their nonchalance, tormenting their servants, often fall into the bottomless being in itself of evil. Comparing them retrospectively with nature, we recognize here an escalation. Nature may generate ugliness in some animals directly and positively, but a human being is capable of defacing and distorting the natural beauty it possesses from inside out through evil, an accomplishment of self-destroying freedom of which the animal is incapable. I never thought about that whole thing about the quote-unquote absolute evil as a consistent self-controlled evil that knows exactly what it wants and knows how far it needs to go to get it, which brings it back to a coherent appearance. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And that is kind of like an archetype that we see in art. The cause of evil and of the ugliness it can convey in the outward appearance of a person is thus freedom itself, and in no way a transcendent being outside it. Evil is man's own act, and so its consequence also belongs to man. Since man has a natural part essentially, it follows that those determinations of ugliness that we found in organic and specifically animal nature are also possible in man. It is true that the type, according to its ideas, leads us to expect a beautiful human appearance, but empirical reality, whose necessary factors include chance and arbitrariness, shows us also ugly forms, and indeed not purely in the form of particular individuals, but in inherited diffusion over large groups. But such forms are not species in the sense in which there are animals that are ugly by birth, whose concept already contains ugliness, distortion, and which is contradictory. Held up to the idea of man, they remain accidents, which empirically are only relatively necessary. These may be of the singular or of the particular type. The singular type occurs when a human organism is deformed through individual illness, for example, scrofula, scoliosis, fracture, and so on. The particular type when deformity comes into being because the organism must adapt itself to a particular locality. In this case, the adaptation to a certain soil type and climate exposes man to the same processes as it does the plant and the animal. The diversity of telluric conditions expresses itself in the diversity of habitus and physiognomy, the more so as they also produce a diversity of modes of life. The inhabitant of mountain range and plain, the woodland hunter and fisherman, the herdsman and the farmer, the inhabitants of the polar zone and of the tropics receive necessarily a different anthropological character. Even cretinism is thus explicable, since it seems to correspond to certain localities, namely to certain mountain streams in which lime deposits are dissolved. The Cretan is much uglier than the black, because he has the added disadvantage of a formless figure with stupidity and mental weakness. His dull eyes, his low forehead, his protruding lower lip, his indifferent gluttony and sexual brutality place him below the black and in the vicinity of the ape, which has the aesthetic advantage over the Cretan of not being human. Certainly a man of his own time with these descriptions.
No comment.
In the concept of the human, thus, there is no ugliness. This concept, as the concept of reason and freedom, demands its realization in exterior appearance through the regularity of form, in the distinction between feet and hands, and in upright posture. If a human being, like the Bushman, like the Cretan, is ugly by nature, his malformation represents also a local and relatively inheritable unfreedom. Illness causes ugliness in every case in which it results in a deformation of the skeleton, of the bones and muscles, for example, in syphilitic bone protrusions and in cases of gangrene. It is ugly in every case in which it discovers the skin, as in jaundice, when it covers the skin with rashes, as in scarlet fever, the plague, certain forms of syphilis, in leprosy, in rashes, in matted hair, and so on. The most awful deformities are undoubtedly those due to syphilis, which produces not only disgusting rashes, but also rotting in the destruction of bone tissue. Exanthems, that is rashes, and abscesses are comparable with the itch mites that burrow under the skin. They are to some extent parasitic individuals whose existence contradicts the essence of the organism as a unity, and because of which it falls apart. The experience of such a contradiction is thus acutely ugly. Disease is generally the cause of ugliness when it alters the form of the body abnormally. Dropsy, tympanitis, etc. belong to this category, but illness is not ugly in cases like phthisis, mania, or states of fever, when it gives the organism a transcendent tincture that makes it appear downright ethereal. Emaciation, a burning gaze, the pale or fever-blushed cheeks of the patient can even make the essence of the spirit more directly visible. The spirit is at this point on the verge of separating from its organism. It still inhabits the body, but only to make it, in effect, into a pure sign. The entire body, in its transparent morbidity, no longer means anything for itself, and has become through and through the expression of a spirit that is leaving, independent of nature. Who has not seen on a deathbed a virgin or youth who, as victim of consumption, offered a truly transfigured sight? No animal can offer such a sight. For the same reasons, it follows that death must not necessarily result in the ugliness of the face, but can as easily leave behind a beautiful, blessed expression. If illness can even, under certain circumstances, beautify a person, it can so much more become a source of beauty in its disappearance. The gradual return of health gives the gaze a free clarity, the cheeks a gentle ruddiness, the refilling of veins and muscles, and the play of strength which begins to stir again in search of pleasure, convey an exceptionally potent beauty, and shower the human form with that ineffable charm in which the appeal of rejuvenation still has in itself its opposite, infirmity, as life still has death. A convalescent is sight for the gods. But we cannot leave spirit just at this point, for there are other ways in which it can generate ugliness than ordinary disease. Namely, it can become ill itself, and as a result express in its outward appearance the contradiction in which it has fallen with itself as spirit. Or more correctly, the disturbance of the soul is in itself true ugliness of spirit as much as evil is. This inner ugliness can, however, also translate itself into the exterior. Idiocy, folly, insanity, and rage make a person ugly. Drunkenness, as an acute, artificially generated self-estrangement of the mind, also belongs here. The sobriety with which the self-aware spirit considers all of its relations and knows itself while individual, to be simultaneously the general essence of reason. This gives the spirit the needed presence of mind, and accordingly also the needed sovereignty over its organism. In disturbances of the soul, however, the person loses the generality of his sense of self as an idiot, or he divests himself of or he divests himself of it limitedly as a fool, or as madman. He feels himself annihilated by the force of a contradiction, and rescues himself from this contradiction only through the fiction of another being, or through going berserk. In all these cases, the patient ascribes false values to the real as well as to the imaginary. The idiot sinks more and more into animal apathy. The fool develops a strange look that turns from reality and presents things and persons to stray into the undefined, a nauseous grimace, a repulsive animation or rigidity, and even in the insane, who suffer from a deeper raggedness of the mind, one notices in the ceremoniousness of their conduct, in the hollowness and incoherence of their pathos, the betrayal of a broken sense of self. Okay, the aesthetically ugly is way too long.
Yeah.
We will leave it here. Good read so far. I like it. I forget what he mentions. It was mentioned, I think there's a preface before the introduction, like after the end of the translator's introduction, in which he mentions, like, yeah, I shouldn't have, like, use as many examples, it's not in good taste. He's like, but all the greats warn about that, and then they break that rule themselves. And he's like, I did too.
I like examples. Plus, it calls attention to things we may not be aware of.
Yeah, besides, it's an aesthetic analysis.
I agree with every word he says here.
Yeah, there's nothing I've disagreed with.
Every word.
Well,
no,
maybe
kidding.
certain ones.
If someone were here that was like an obvious punching bag, I would have said it about them, but I'll do it about myself. All right.
All right, yeah. So
No, it's good so far, generally. Most of it is very good. Still applicable. Eternally applicable.
Yeah, I think so. What
could the eternally beautiful horse and so on.
Yeah, I still disagree. It's not the most beautiful animal. It's a beautiful one, but no. Anyways, this has been Antonio Wolf. See you next time.